There comes a time when the soul grows weary of the noise, the endless echo of demands, expectations, and frantic gestures toward meaning. In that moment, something ancient stirs within, not a call to action, but a whisper to retreat. This is not weakness, it is not escape. It is the sacred instinct of the psyche returning to its source, the womb of silence from which all authentic life arises. To withdraw is not to vanish, it is to descend. Into the cavern beneath appearances, into the dream, world beneath the waking, into the dark and fertile silence where the self, not yet fragmented by roles and labels, waits patiently. The outer world, in its obsession with productivity and constant movement, calls this laziness. But the inner world knows better. It knows that stillness is not stagnation. It is preparation. It is orientation. It is listening for the voice that cannot be heard over the shouting of the ego. When one dares to stop, not merely in body but in will, one enters the realm where symbols are born. It is here in this inner withdrawal that the unconscious begins its mysterious work. Dreams arrive with new clarity. Patterns of pain begin to reveal their origins. That which once controlled us from the shadows becomes illuminated, not by effort, but by attention. The kind of attention that comes only when one is still enough to notice. Modern man, trained from youth to strive, to conquer, to overcome, feels panic at the thought of doing nothing. But the soul does not care for conquest. It longs for meaning, and meaning does not shout, it waits. It hides beneath the surface of routines and roles, and only emerges when invited through silence. Withdrawal, then, is not absence, it is presence. A deeper kind of presence that no external task can offer. In this sacred retreat, the psyche reorganizes itself. The masks begin to fall away. One begins to see which desires were truly one's own, and which were inherited from fear, from culture, from collective shadow. The noise dies down, and in its place, archetypes begin to rise, not as ideas, but as living forces. The inner child appears, wounded but waiting. The inner sage, once silenced, begins to speak. The shadow circles the edge of consciousness, no longer a threat, but a teacher. To withdraw is to sink below the surface of things, to stop reacting and begin perceiving. The world continues in its urgency, but the soul has found a deeper rhythm, one governed not by minutes or tasks, but by the pulse of eternity. And here, in this unhurried space, something remarkable begins to occur, not because you made it happen, but because you finally got out of the way. And so, the deeper work begins, not in motion, but in stillness. Beneath the surface of what we call thought, beneath the chatter of the rational mind, the analysis, the fears, the strategies, there exists another intelligence. It does not speak in language. It does not measure time. It moves not with urgency, but with precision, shaped by instinct, myth, symbol, and dream. This is the unconscious, and it is not chaos as many suppose. It is order too vast, too subtle, too ancient to be mapped by logic. It is the original architect of our becoming. To trust it is not to abandon reason, but to acknowledge that reason is only one eye, and the other must remain fixed inward. The unconscious has already drawn the shape of your life in shadow long before you tried to direct it in daylight. It has chosen your wounds, your fears, your longings, not as punishments, but as maps. Each image that recurs in your dreams, each coincidence that stirs something within, is a signpost not pointing outward, but inward, toward the territory where your real journey waits. This deeper self does not move in straight lines. It spirals, it returns, it waits. And while the conscious mind panics over detours and delays, the unconscious gently arranges what needs to be encountered. A chance meeting, a book that falls off a shelf, a sudden illness, a breakup, a strange symbol in a dream that lingers for weeks, these are not accidents, they are directives. invisible movements from the psyche attempting to guide you without force. And yet, we resist, we try to control, we chart goals, we make demands, and in doing so, we often silence the very force that already holds the wisdom we seek. The unconscious speaks in a different tongue, images, emotions, body sensations, symbols from the collective well we all draw from. To understand it, one must unlearn the arrogance of control. One must become quiet, observant, willing to be led by what cannot be seen. There is a reason why we feel drawn to certain people, repelled by others. Why certain stories stir us to tears for reasons we cannot name. The path was never meant to be figured out entirely from the top of the mind. The blueprint is already encoded within. Like a seed that knows how to become a tree without instruction, we too carry the entire pattern of our becoming. But that unfolding can only happen when we stop imposing and begin allowing. To let the unconscious lead is not passivity, it is deep alignment, the kind of alignment that happens when the personality begins to serve the soul rather than oppose it. It is the art of watching with reverence, moving with intuition, choosing not from fear, but from resonance. Life begins to feel less like something to be conquered, and more like something to be remembered. And in this remembering, we begin to see that what we called delays were preparations, that what we thought were mistakes were initiations, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, was ever wasted. It was all part of a deeper rhythm, one that the unconscious was keeping all along. The mind clings to control like a child clutching a fading light in the darkness, afraid that without its grasp, all will be lost. But what it fails to see is that the light it holds so tightly is a flicker compared to the unseen fire that surrounds it. Control is the great illusion of the ego, a fragile scaffolding built atop shifting sands, designed to keep chaos at bay. And yet, it is often this very structure that prevents us from entering the deeper order that lies beneath. We are taught from an early age that safety is found in control. Control over our time, our image, our outcomes, our relationships. We build plans, protect identities, and map out futures as if life were a problem to be solved rather than a mystery to be lived. But beneath all this effort is fear, the fear of powerlessness, of unpredictability, of surrender. And it is this fear that keeps the soul locked in a narrow chamber, pacing, restless, unable to exhale. But control is a mask, and like all masks, it must eventually crack. Life, in its great mercy, will always arrange for the breaking, not to punish, but to liberate. It may come through loss, illness, betrayal, failure, those experiences that cannot be negotiated, cannot be managed, cannot be fixed. They arrive like storms, tearing through the illusion, demanding that something deeper emerge. In these moments, the ego panics. It reaches for certainty, for the old strategies, but nothing works, because the point is not to restore the illusion. The point is to see through it, to recognize that what you thought was holding your life together was, in truth, keeping you from experiencing it fully. That real power does not come from domination, but from surrender, not the weak surrender of resignation, but the holy surrender of alignment. Letting go is not giving up. It is the conscious act of releasing your grip on what was never yours to hold. It is recognizing that life is not a machine to be programmed, but a living organism that speaks, responds, and evolves. It is beginning to trust the intelligence that moves through seasons, rivers, animals, and dreams. That same intelligence moves through you, if only you'd allow it. There is a strange peace that arrives when control is no longer the goal. A quiet power begins to take its place, not the kind that demands outcomes, but the kind that walks with presence. It listens instead of insists. It responds instead of reacts. It allows things to unfold rather than force them into shape. And in this openness, life begins to reveal a rhythm far more intricate and beautiful than anything the ego could construct. The paradox, of course, is that the moment you stop grasping, things begin to come together. Not always in the way you imagined, but often in the way you most deeply needed. The relationships that remained after you stopped chasing, the opportunities that arose after you stopped pushing, the insights that arrived only once you became still enough to hear them. This is not magic. It is alignment. It is what happens when you step aside and let the current carry you, not away from yourself, but back to the place where you were always meant to be. And so, the unraveling continues, not with destruction, but with quiet revelation. The need to control falls away, layer by layer, and something ancient and true begins to emerge from within. In a world addicted to speed, to outcomes, to the constant proof of progress, waiting is misunderstood. It is treated as absence, as failure, as emptiness. But there exists a different kind of waiting, one not born of helplessness, but of deep attunement. This is not the waiting of despair. It is not the resignation of those who have given up. It is a sacred posture of the soul, a listening, a holding, a trusting in the rhythms that cannot be rushed. There are forces moving beneath the surface of what we call reality, shaping the unseen scaffolding of events and encounters. They do not operate on the clock. They cannot be accelerated by intention alone. They emerge when the moment is ripe, when the inner world has ripened enough to match the outer. To wait, then, is not to be passive. It is to prepare, to be fully present in the in-between. It is an act of deep cooperation with a wisdom that moves beyond the ego's timeline. The mind will protest. It will urge action, demand resolution, chase distractions. It will confuse motion for meaning, busyness for value. But the soul speaks another language. It knows that the most transformative periods are not those of frantic doing, but those where time seems to stretch, where silence deepens, where nothing seems to happen, yet everything is being rearranged beneath the threshold of awareness. Active waiting is a kind of inner alertness, a willingness to feel without immediately fixing, to see without immediately judging, to experience without rushing to categorize. It is what the earth does in winter. It appears dormant, but beneath the surface, life is gathering itself. Roots are deepening. The invisible architecture of spring is already forming. So it is with us. In seasons of pause, we are not being punished. We are being readied. To wait actively is to tend to the space between where you are and where you're going. It is not sitting idly by hoping for change, but preparing the vessel so that when change arrives, it can be received without spilling over. It is listening more deeply, moving more slowly, allowing your inner landscape to become fertile ground. Not for any specific outcome, but for whatever is most aligned with your true becoming. This form of waiting requires a strength few recognize, the strength to endure ambiguity, the strength to stay with the question rather than escape into premature answers, the strength to hold desire without forcing its fulfillment. It is here that you begin to encounter your own thresholds, the places within you that resist stillness, that fear openness, that equate worth with productivity. And it is precisely these inner tensions that become the material of transformation. In the silence of active waiting, synchronicities begin to emerge. What once seemed random takes on symbolic meaning. What once felt stagnant becomes a container for gestation. The ego may call it delay, but the soul recognizes it as divine timing, and slowly, subtly, without effort or manipulation, the next movement begins to take form, not because you pushed, but because you made space. Not because you demanded, but because you surrendered with awareness. To wait in this way is to trust that the deeper intelligence of life is not asleep. It is to believe that something within you is always listening, always adjusting, always unfolding, not according to the plan you drafted in fear, but according to the pattern etched in the hidden architecture of your being. Before anything becomes clear, it must first become broken. This is the law of inner transformation. Before order arises, there must be disruption. Before vision clarifies, confusion must reign. Chaos is not the opposite of coherence. It is its cradle, its womb. It is the ancient forge in which the old self is melted down to make way for the new. And yet, we flee from chaos as though it were a mistake, as though it signals failure rather than birth. The psyche, like nature, moves in spirals, not in straight, linear lines. What seems like disarray is often a necessary dismantling. Structures that no longer serve the soul must fracture, illusions must fall, identities must dissolve, and in the midst of that undoing, the conscious mind often panics. It sees only the collapse, the disintegration. It sees the pieces but cannot yet glimpse the pattern, and so it labels the moment as wrong, as regression, as ruin. But the deeper truth is more mysterious, more intelligent than that. What we call chaos is often the soul rearranging itself from the inside out. There are times when the path becomes obscured, when nothing makes sense, when dreams crumble and the center will not hold. In these times, the temptation is to restore the old order, cling to what is familiar, reach for premature solutions, return to outdated roles. But to do so is to interrupt a sacred process, because it is precisely in the dissolution that a deeper pattern is trying to emerge. The old world must come undone before a new one can take form, not externally but within. The mythologies of every culture know this truth. They are filled with gods and heroes who descend into darkness, into dismemberment, into madness, only to return with new vision, new strength, new wholeness. The descent is not a punishment. It is a rite of passage. The chaos is not random. It is archetypal. It is the activation of forces that move us beyond the known into the unknown, where authentic transformation begins. And yet, this chaos is not without structure. Though the conscious mind cannot comprehend it, the unconscious moves with precision. It breaks only what must be broken. It disturbs only what has become stagnant. It shatters not to destroy, but to free. Like a storm that tears the dead branches from a tree, chaos clears space. It removes what can no longer carry the weight of your becoming. It does not consult your comfort. It consults your essence. In these times, you are not meant to find answers. You are meant to feel everything, to be undone, to be disoriented, to allow the alchemy of breakdown to do its work. It is in this crucible that the true gold begins to form, not the gold of certainty or success, but the gold of inner clarity, of soulful coherence, not the perfection of the personality, but the integration of the self. There is a rhythm in the chaos if you dare to stay. Beneath the noise, a new order is assembling itself. Slowly, invisibly, you may not yet see it. You may feel lost, fragmented, scattered. But the fragments are not trash. They are seeds. What falls apart is not discarded. It is repurposed. The pain, the grief, the disorientation, all become part of the new structure. Nothing is wasted. Everything belongs. And so the soul waits, not passively, but attentively, as the unknown rearranges the inner cosmos. Chaos, in this light, is not destruction. It is deep construction taking place in the dark. The outer world changes, but the inner world repeats itself through forms more ancient than we remember. Beneath the surface of daily events, beneath names and headlines and personal stories, there are forces moving, not visible but deeply real. They are not concepts. They are not metaphors. They are living presences, timeless patterns of psychic truth. These are the archetypes, and they move through us like rivers flowing beneath the crust of identity. To the unaware, they seem like moods, obsessions, instincts, or accidents. But to the awakened eye, they are signals, signposts from the unconscious realm that the self is shifting shape. Archetypes do not announce themselves directly. They appear as dreams that refuse to be forgotten, as strange patterns in relationships, as inner figures that haunt or inspire. They arrive when we are ready, or when we have refused to grow and are now being summoned to. To watch for the archetypes is to begin seeing symbolically. It is to understand that you are not merely a personality, not merely a name living in a specific time, but a vessel through which universal stories want to live again. The orphan, the warrior, the sage, the lover, the shadow. They rise and fall within the psyche, not randomly, but in response to what the soul requires to evolve. They are not fantasies. They are structures of meaning, inherited through collective memory, waiting for the right moment to emerge and take the lead. When something shifts dramatically in your life, when you feel as if you're playing a role you've never rehearsed, when the world begins to echo with mythic intensity, it is often a sign that an archetype is stirring. Perhaps the rebel has risen because your authenticity can no longer tolerate falsehood. Perhaps the healer has awakened after years of inner wounding. Perhaps the trickster arrives to dismantle the rigidity of a life too carefully planned. These forces are not polite. They do not ask permission. They enter the psyche the way a storm enters the sky, inevitable, elemental, charged with energy that demands expression. But their aim is never destruction for its own sake. It is transformation. They come to initiate, to stretch, to deepen. They arrive to carry you across a threshold you might never have crossed on your own, but they cannot be controlled. They cannot be negotiated with like ordinary thoughts. They demand reverence. To watch them moving is not to analyze, but to witness, to observe with humility how your life, your dreams, your relationships begin to pulse with a symbolic intelligence. You begin to see that your partner is not just a partner, but the mirror of your anima or animus. That your enemy is not just a threat, but the embodiment of your shadow. That your longing is not just personal desire, but the call of the soul toward the divine. Archetypes do not belong to us. We belong to them. They are the architecture of human experience itself, and when they move, they bring upheaval and clarity, disorientation and insight all at once. They do not ask for obedience, but for engagement. They require not perfection, but participation. To work with them is to allow your story to become mythic, not in the sense of fantasy, but in the sense of depth, significance, and purpose. And so you begin to look differently at your life. You begin to ask not only what is happening, but what is trying to emerge through this. You begin to dream more vividly. You begin to notice synchronicities, those strange alignments that suggest you are no longer moving alone, but are being moved by something larger. The archetypes are not just within you. They are all around you, shaping the field of meaning in which you exist. They will not leave you as they found you. Their presence demands sacrifice, the sacrifice of smallness, of certainty, of control. But in return, they offer something eternal, the chance to become not just a survivor of life, but a conscious participant in its great unfolding mystery. There comes a moment, unexpected, unsought, when the chaos no longer feels like chaos, and the silence is no longer empty. Something clicks, not with fanfare, not with spectacle, but with a quiet inward alignment. It is not that the world has changed, but that your vision has cleared. You realize that what once felt scattered, broken, or delayed was not lost. It was moving, reconfiguring, reweaving itself around something deeper than your desires. And in that quiet revelation, things begin to fall into place, not because you forced them to, but because you finally stopped standing in the way. But this falling into place is not about external order. It is not a return to the familiar. It is not life going back to normal. It is the soul turning inward, returning not to a past version of itself, but to its origin, its essence, its wholeness. It is the self reclaiming its throne from the fragmented voices of the ego. And it almost always comes after a journey through the unknown. To return to the self is not to add something new to yourself. It is to uncover what was buried. It is to remember what the noise made you forget. Beneath all the adaptations, roles, wounds, and compensations, the self waits, not passively, but with immense generative power. It is the silent core around which your personality has always orbited. And when you return to it, not as an idea, but as a living experience, everything begins to reorient around a deeper axis. But the path there is not linear. It is spiral, labyrinthine. You will lose your way 1,000 times. You will mistake identity for essence, noise for truth, reaction for awakening, and still something within you calls. A subtle pull toward authenticity, a quiet rejection of what is false, a growing discomfort with the shallow explanations of the outer world. These are the first signs of return, the soul beginning to remember itself through longing. The fall into place is the soul settling back into its natural shape. The thoughts that once raced begin to slow. The emotions that once ruled begin to soften. The compulsions that once governed your decisions begin to dissolve, not because you are trying harder, but because the self does not need effort to be itself. It only needs space, and when that space is made, through surrender, stillness, and inner attention, it begins to draw the world around you into a more honest reflection of your truth. This return is not always peaceful. Often it arrives with grief, the grief of seeing how far you wandered, how much of yourself you gave away, how long you tried to become what you never truly were. But even the grief is holy. It is the soul's way of purifying, not to punish you, but to make room, to clear the psychic clutter so that the essential can reemerge. And when it does, you find yourself less reactive, more grounded, more able to move with rather than against the tides of life. Decisions become simpler because they are no longer made from fear or performance, but from inner coherence. You are no longer trying to prove your worth through outcomes. You are no longer chasing mirrors. You are remembering your own light. The world may or may not respond. Things outside you may not shift in dramatic ways, but something inside is different, more spacious, more rooted, more sovereign. The self is not concerned with appearances. It is not bound by time. It does not ask for applause. It asks only for integration, for your life to become an expression of the wholeness that has always lived quietly within you. And so you begin again, not as someone new, but as someone ancient returning. The falling into place is not the destination. It is the rhythm of alignment. It is the ongoing recognition that all outer harmony begins with inner reunion. It is not an event. It is a movement, a gentle yet powerful unfolding of what has always been true beneath the surface of becoming.